The Great Debt Fiasco: How Washington's reckless and opportunistic pandemic splurge jeopardized America's future. As the U.S. blows past $33 trillion in national debt for the first time and adds roughly $1 billion in new debt every hour, a comprehensive new report from the Heritage Foundation reveals that the U.S. government has tacked on $7.5 trillion in new debt over past 2 years alone, drawing a stark image of America's economic prospects. The report sheds light on a series of colossal spending packages rolled out between March 2020 and December 2022, amounting to an astronomical $7.464 trillion in debt, or a staggering $57,400 per household. The Heritage Foundation splits the ordeal into three components: the nature of federal spending, the Federal Reserve's role in this fiasco, and the impending ramifications of this debt accumulation. The conclusions drawn are far from comforting. Much of the pandemic-era expenditure was not only unwarranted but actively detrimental, leaving the country grappling with an inflation surge, labor shortages, and broken supply chains, Fox News reports. The COVID-19 pandemic unleashed unprecedented federal fiscal and monetary actions that wasted trillions of dollars, said the Heritage experts. Indeed, most of this drunken spending was done in the name of a virus that kills less than 1% of those it infects, mostly the elderly and the obese, and employed extreme lockdown measures which were no more effective than countries that refused to do the same.
The new warning from the World Health Organization: the death rate from the coronavirus is rising. 3.4% is higher.
Twice as deadly as previous estimates.
3.4%. State of emergency.
Well, I think the 3.4% is really a false number. Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people that do this, I think the number is way under 1%.
So to fact check, the World Health Organization says the coronavirus death rate is 3.4%.
President Trump lies that the World Health Organization is wrong.
The number is 3.4%. 3.4% is what it's being reported around the world, making it deadlier.
So much death.
The death rate.
The percentage is 3.4%, and no hunch from the president can change that.
Trump lied about the most recent World Health Organization estimate that the global death rate of coronavirus is 3.4%.
The 3.4% death rate was wrong, and WHO data later updated it to
A fraction of 1%.
Let's go back into history.
Trump has a hunch that the death rate is lower than 1%.
Way under 1%.
Way under 1%.
Will someone put a mozzarella stick in his stupid old...
Trump lied to viewers about the mortality rate.
Way under 1%.
False information.
He's spreading disinformation.
Misinformation and dangerous disinformation.
If you're president of the United States, you have the world's greatest scientists at your disposal. You listen to them.
Leading scientists, including Dr. Fauci, wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine that the death rate could be considerably less than 1%.
Way under 1%.
Why are you going on national television and contradicting experts based on a hunch?
His fake hunch with some fake math. The president somehow thinks it could be lower than 1% based on nothing.
Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people that do this.
Outright lies, contradicting health officials on fatality rates.
It's not a time for Donald Trump to be calling into cable shows. It's a time for the CDC.
What is CDC's best estimate of the fatality rate?
It's somewhere between 0.5% and 1%.
A fraction of 1%.
The president is spreading false information.
Information discarding what the health professionals are saying.
Outright bogus information.
Science is not based on hunches.
A hunch about what he thinks is going on.
Instead of trusting information from doctors and scientists, he has a hunch.
Hunch.
It's not a time for Donald Trump's hunches. It's a time for science. It's a time for doctors.
Welcome, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya.
My hypothesis
My hunch.
was it was likely to be less deadly than the World Health Organization was saying.
3.4%.
There's no way that was true.
Really a false number.
This is why I ran the study in April of 2020.
And what did you discover?
The infection fatality rate was 0.2%.
Way under 1%.
Trump continues to contradict and downplay all things coronavirus.
The president appearing to contradict medical experts on the mortality rate of the virus.
Personally, I would say the number is way under 1%.
Later on CNN.
Our estimates are probably pretty inflated.
Very high because the easy cases, they don't report to doctors or the hospital in many cases. So
Initially, WHO released estimates of 3.4%.
really a false number.
The true infection fatality rate is likely to be far, far less.
Way under 1%.
It could be in the range of a seasonal influenza.
A fraction of 1%. This is just my hunch.
He is spreading misinformation and disinformation.
You can even call it information.
An outbreak of sketchy information coming from the
He's
president.
using a hunch instead of listening to the Global Authority on Public Health.
A hunch?
There's a lot to be concerned about.
His hunch.
A hunch.
Hunches.
Just my hunch. His hunch.
His hunch.
My hunch.
Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people. That's not what you want for the American people.
A hunch.
I think, in retrospect, those quotes are going to look even more damning.
Sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying.
A pandemic of misinformation.
To put out misinformation.
Spreading false information. The disinformation.
Falsehoods.
Wrong and misleading information.
Misleading.
Misinformation and misinformation.
Misinformation.
Just unspeakably reckless.
It's totally reckless.
It's dangerous to have conflicting messages out there.
That is very dangerous.
How dangerous is it?
Really dangerous.
What is the danger?
I think we're in a very dangerous period. If the president continues to hunch.
Same. The authors say that the U.S. Congress failed to couple any justifiable pandemic spending with measure to reduce future deficits. A looming fiscal crisis has shifted from a long-term concern to a current event. Congress must return to responsible governance for America to avoid further economic calamity, the report concludes. When there's a supply shock, when the economy tumbles off a cliff, all the government can do is make the recovery longer and slower by trying to give you a sugar pill on the front end, said co-author Richard Stern, director of the Grover M. Hermann Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. That's what happened here. We are now suffering worse 4 years later because the government did things in the moment to make it look a little better. Breaking it down, $2.22 trillion was spent by the Trump administration's March 2020 COVID response and a December 2020 stimulus package. The rest was spent by the Biden administration via the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and other various packages. According to Heritage President Kevin Roberts, the report's findings explain how we got here and provide recommendations for extinguishing the fire so that we can change course and reduce the severe economic pain facing everyday Americans across the country. Inflation doesn't just happen, it is a direct result of overbearing, clumsy, dysfunctional government policies, said Roberts. While everyday Americans suffer under the hidden tax of Biden's crippling inflation, at the gas pump and checkout counters, in utility bills, rents, and car payments, Congress and the President have an unending appetite for more spending, regulation, and subsidies. The report also notes that the so-called Inflation Reduction Act is a complete misnomer that has only done the exact opposite. This reckless and politically opportunistic spending spree has left the U.S. with a weakened economy, an inflation crisis, and a looming debt crisis. The volume and nature of the spending spree helped to create skyrocketing inflation and interest rates and created a labor shortage, reducing real household incomes and leaving store shelves bare and supply chains broken. What does this mean for the future? According to the authors, the amount of damage caused by the federal spending spree is immense, and the size and scope of the long-term fiscal problem can be overwhelming, reads the report's final paragraph. Policymakers must address this reality in a sober fashion, neither pretending that easy fixes exist nor ignoring the problem altogether. This will require controlling spending, returning to meaningful budgeting, and fixing problems at the Federal Reserve. There is a genuine opportunity for leadership if elected officials have the courage and foresight to do the right thing, both for America's near-term battle against inflation and its long-term economic prospects.